to the different components of a personality. And then we're going to be doing a lot of interactive stuff today, because interaction is really important, especially when we're talking about personalities, how it relates to you, but also how you can impact others, what types of questions you want to ask, as well as listening. How many of you guys feel like you're pretty weak when it comes to listening? Okay, how many of you guys have been in a conversation and midway through that conversation you have asked that person a question and you heard about a fraction of the answer? All of us have done it before, right?
Depends on how long they talk for.
Okay, how long does it take, Tobias?
Like, if they're talking for more than like 2 minutes, it's like, ask a question, not for a novel.
All right. So make your answer short with Tobias, okay?
No. I like to listen. I'm just not very good at it.
Okay, some people, you ask them a question and they will go on for about 5 to 10 minutes about that particular answer, right? It could be a story that they needed to tell. It could be you have asked them a question about, a previous experience that they've had. And so some people will be very short and concise with their answers, and some people will take quite a bit of time. And that all depends on their personality and their makeup. What they feel is important, to share with you. And then also, some people will be concise because they don't think that you value them as much. Or that what you have to say only is valued in some regards for you personally. Does that make sense? So, some people, for instance, when we're talking about athletes in an athletic realm, our perception of an athlete is what? What makes up an athlete?
If you run and jump.
Okay, so we're talking about muscle, right? Strength and endurance. What else makes an athlete?
What sports you play. Like
Okay, what your
basketball,
involvement is.
Football, baseball, track.
Track, cross country, golf. What else? What makes up an athlete?
Their demeanor.
Their demeanor, okay? Yeah, that's a great one. Are they stable? Are they someone who can handle pressure? Do they have integrity? What other types of things? What about ego? What about confidence? Those things kind of make up an athlete too, right? Communication is part of an athlete. And we're going to talk about several studies that have been done and how psychologists have identified athletes and their demeanor and what makes up an athlete as a group, and when we're talking about groupings of athletes, whether it's a team-related sport or an individual-related sport. So people who happen to be athletes are put into an environment which most likely has some sort of a pressured situation. So you think about your games. So we've got volleyball, we've got basketball, and we've got soccer in here. At some point, there's going to be a situation where it's high pressure. And how many of you guys have watched some of the basketball games this past week? Okay, identify a high pressured game that you observed this week.
Duke. UCF.
Duke and UCF. Okay, what was the most pivotal part about that game?
Free throws.
Free throws? What else?
Fouling out Taco Fall.
Yeah. Okay.
Layups.
Layups. Right. So how many opportunities did UCF have in the last 2 minutes of the game to sustain the lead? Who didn't watch that game? Maybe that.
Well, like I started and then I got stressed and So I
Okay.
didn't see the end.
Okay.
I was
So a couple of things happened within the last minute and a half, 2 minutes of the game. UCF was ahead. Zion Williamson got fouled. Made the first free throw, missed the second free throw.
Got the
They got the rebound. Duke got the rebound. Okay. So what happened with UCF? It's a high pressure situation, right?
they didn't box
Somebody failed to box out, right? Okay.
out. It
so
was
they-
a lucky bounce too. It was a pretty lucky bounce.
Yeah, it was a pretty, but he was obviously in front of the basket, right? What was his name that got the rebound?
RJ Barrett.
Yeah. So, got the rebound, got the putback, right? Now we have this back and forth situation. At one point, UCF gets a steal, throws the ball for a long pass alley-oop. They miss it. Duke immediately rebounds the ball, brings it back. If they had made that alley-oop, what would have happened?
Momentum.
The momentum would be on UCF, right? And it would be sustained, right? But because they made that split-second decision, they had two opportunities. They could have either thrown the alley-oop. That person could have grabbed the ball, taken their time to step down and then jump back up. Okay, it didn't have to be an alley-oop dunk situation. It didn't have to be that. Or they could have thrown it to UCF. They could have pulled the ball back out to take off time, right? But instead, within a second, threw it, missed the dunk. Duke grabs the basketball, puts it back over on this end of the court. Okay, opportunity missed. The last, how many seconds of the game was it? Can't remember, about 5 seconds, 7 seconds of the game. UCF calls timeout. They're at their end of the court. They have a play. This guy grabs the ball. He goes off the screen, and his opportunity was to drive into the hole. Okay, he drove in, shot a layup around the post, missed it. Somebody else tried to do a putback, missed. The game was over. Duke wins. Okay. Now that high pressure situation in the locker room, did anybody watch the locker room post game? Guys were sobbing on UCF. Why? Because they put their hearts on the line. They risked everything. And yeah, there were a couple of times when the pressure got the best of them and they failed to do something physically, because it takes focus, right? It takes concentration and focus within that. They didn't do something physically. They didn't box out when they needed to. They didn't make a layup when they needed to. They didn't take their time when they needed to, because of those different things. It's human error. It's common to make human mistakes, okay? But they put everything they had on the line, and they wanted that win quite a bit. And it wasn't the end outcome. But they had to risk. They had to put everything on the line to even try and beat Duke, right? So all the time we're in high pressure situations. We're put in those high pressure situations because of the competition that we're in. So how does your background affect your responses? And we're gonna talk about that in ways of our role-related behaviors and our typical responses that we have. But our background, how does growing up, what does your child look like? How are those things? How has your personality been affected in creating the response that you have to different situations? Whether it be conflict within the team, whether it be high pressure situations, whatever the case may be. Improvements. When an athlete says, you know, I don't like to be coached during practice. I only like criticism after practice. What does that result in? A myriad of things, right? What about a player who doesn't like to be called out in practice? Where does their concentration go? Well, some people it really motivates them. Others it doesn't. Instead, they'll concentrate and dwell on it the entire rest of the practice. They might even mope the entire rest of the practice. So how does your background, how did growing up affect your responses? And are they good responses or bad responses? Where's that negative? If you decide to take that criticism that you had received from the coach in front of everybody in practice and decide to dwell on it the entire practice, who are you benefiting? Nobody. Not even yourself, right? So it's a negative response. But we have teammates who do that. We will have people within our teams, when you guys coach one day, you will have people on your teams that will do that. And as a coach, you have two choices to make. You can either then take them after practice and say, okay, we have this situation going on. Let's talk about that. Let's see if we can have some resolution to it. Or you can just let it go and continue on as is. If you continue to let that behavior go, what happens as a result? Well, now you've had this wall put up, and now you understand, well, if I decide to let them do that all the time, then they're going to negatively impact the team, and the rest of the team now knows what? You're allowed to get away with something like that. And it's a negative behavior. It helps nobody. It doesn't help you as a player, and it doesn't help everybody else. So depending on responses and reactions to the game, how you respond, and then how do you respond to your teammates? If you have somebody berating the rest of the team in high pressure situations, what's going to occur? More chances for human error is what's going to occur. Because people will be afraid to fail. People will be afraid to risk. And now you have an entire team who wants to play it safe and not risk. So individually, how are you perceiving your teammates? How are you perceiving your coaches? And then as a coach or somebody who's trying to help their teammate, where does grace play a role into all of it? Will you allow your teammates to make mistakes? Will you allow your teammates the opportunity to maybe display a negative behavior, but then let them have the opportunity to apologize for it? Take that apology and move on. There was a player once, about a decade ago, volleyball team, third. They're third ranked in the conference. It was one of the best teams Calgary ever had for volleyball. They get into the regional tournament. And their key defensive player lets the emotion, lets the competition, and lets the high pressure situation get the best of her. And so her reaction and her response to that situation was to try and get her teammates motivated, but the only way that she knew how to do that was to communicate through anger. Okay? And because of that, the rest of her team not only felt the intensity of the game, but then they also felt the intensity of this player. And if anybody knows volleyball, every emotion that's displayed on the court affects everybody. The rhythm of the game affects everybody. Yes, there's 6 players on the court, but there's only 3 touches that can be achieved before the ball goes over the net. So if you've affected negatively those 3 players, then the outcome isn't going to be as good as you want it to be, right? So she wigged out. Finally, she didn't know what to do, so she gave up, which is the worst thing you can do, especially in volleyball. They ended up losing. Now, what's the aftermath of that? What would be the aftermath? If you had a teammate who just did that, who was the centerpiece of your defensive scheme, gave up. Last game of the year. That's how you ended the game. That's how you ended the season. What do? This is discussion class. Come on.
Oh,
Where's
you
my
were
interaction?
asking us a question?
What?
Yeah, that was for us.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the person, like the reaction. Cause me, I probably wouldn't say that. Honestly, I wouldn't say that to the person. Not like in a rude way. I just wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Not at the particular time. I probably mention it later. But at that time when they're angry, I probably wouldn't say that to them. I just let them be there.
Okay. What about someone else?
I don't think I'd say anything out loud, but I probably have a lot going on in my head.
Okay. So what would you have in your head?
Just like, probably like a lot of anger, like, probably at them, but also at myself, to the point where it would be, I can't believe she gave up, but at the same time, I can't believe I allowed myself to give up just because she gave up. So, it'd probably be anger towards both things, but I think I would try and place most of the blame on that one person.
On that one
so
person.
that way I could feel better about myself. If we're gonna be honest.
Okay. Yeah, Taylor?
How do other people react
How
to
did
giving up? Yeah.
How did they react? I'll tell you in just a second. But what else? How do you respond? You've taken this entire journey. You've been one of the most successful volleyball teams in Calvary history, and your last game ends this way with 4 seniors on your team.
Wait, how did it end?
I mean,
Here's that
Tobias.
in that moment, I would probably be angry with them.
You'd be angry.
I'd be really angry at that moment. I would settle down eventually, but right then and there, I would be really angry. Especially, like you said, after that long journey, how hard it was to get there. And you couldn't put your emotions aside for that one moment. That would be hard for me.
And for me, it kind of depends on what our 2 roles are, what my role is and what that that person's role is. Like if we're both leaders on the team, I'd probably go to them and be like, hey, listen, I understand that you're upset, but we can't do that. Especially because I know the volleyball program here, that's something that we encourage not doing, is letting your emotions get ahead of you and giving up is something we don't do. And so I think kind of explaining that in a loving way.
Have you guys in your programs experienced that? Maybe not here at Calvary, but in past competitions and past teams, have you experienced that? Where a player on your team, or maybe you, like your emotions get the better of you and you gave up?
I've had both.
Okay.
One of them, the teammate, it was more like she got angry at everything, but she also thought she knew more than everyone else. And my reaction was not very nice. But I was still pretty young, but my reaction was to do this. Which doesn't actually go very well.
What is that?
What? This, it means to shut up. So that was like an season and tournament game and whatnot, and we were losing by quite a bit, and she just kept getting angry, and I was just kind of stop, and that didn't really help anything. After that, the relationship was just pretty much sour until we parted ways.
Yeah. Yeah, because responses and reactions can actually hurt your friendship with that individual as well. Alright, so with this team, 4 seniors, okay, one of the most successful volleyball teams in Calgary, they had an incredible hard time trying to forgive this individual for what had occurred. And with some of them, it took about 6 months for that. Because they felt like they were cheated out of their full potential as a team. Because it wasn't the team that they lost to, they shouldn't have lost to. And so they had high hopes, high expectations, and they felt like it all crumbled because of this one individual and their choices that they made that day. Should it take 6 months to forgive somebody? No. It means that you've increased the value of a game over a person. And you can't increase that value of a game over a person. You can't increase success over a person when it comes down to it at the end of the day. And life isn't fair, right? With all of us, we're all going to be taking something that we feel we're owed or we're deserving of, and it be snatched away. And that happens. And so it will happen in competitive situations as well within your teams. And so how you value your teammates and the mistakes that occur, people are human nature. We can only have so many expectations. Okay? But we want to have our standards high for everybody. Everybody should be expected to work at this level. Everybody should be expected to be givers. Everybody should be selfless. All of those different characteristics should be, the level of respect should be there, right? So we're still dealing with people though. Whether they're athletes or not, they're still people at the end of the day. So where's our grace? So performance versus personality. So the idea that athletes who perform on the court should have a higher level of morality on and off the court. So we faced teams that we didn't feel had a very high sense of morality, right? They played dirty. They knew when to push and shove when the refs weren't looking. Can't really cheat very much in volleyball. But you can in soccer, right?
Don't try that in that.
Okay. So there's that level of expectation of everybody else should be playing at a high moral level as everybody else, right? But that's not necessarily the case. And have we ever experienced a team who played dirty and at the end of the game won as a result? Yeah, that has happened, right? So again, we get cheated out of that because they were allowed to play a certain way to gain the advantage. So in our expectations, we have devotions, we have the details, the fundamentals in practice, the methods of behavior. All of those things fall in line with our perspective and our expectations as a Calvary team. But that's not necessarily the case, even amongst the Christian teams that we play against. Not everybody is a Christian. And we can't expect that everybody on our team are Christians either. We hope so, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is the case. So what are your expectations of behavior, and how have your expectations not been met? Maybe within yourself or with others, with your teammates or with your opponents. That has an impact on your motivation. So if somebody you're playing against plays dirty, and their coach is allowing them to do that, our response is to get angry. Well, this isn't fair. What happens to our motivation as a result? We either get angry back, maybe push or shove, put an elbow in, whatever that case may be. We may do that, or we may not. We might be able to be stable. We might have that demeanor of being able to produce our performance and not let it slip aside from what somebody else is doing. So we have to then assess individually, and when you're coaches, and your player comes up to you and says, hey, they're grabbing our uniforms, they're pushing and shoving, they're not letting us play, your coach can only do so much, right? But if your expectation is for your coach to just storm the field or storm the coach or the refs and say, hey, what's happening right now isn't right, it's still up to the refs to make the calls and the decisions. The coach can't do that, right? So what you have control over is your response. No matter what the environment has, your response has an impact, and the impact amongst everybody else around you. So we have 3 different dynamics of our personality. Okay, so the first one is role-related behavior. Now I'm going to give you these definitions, and then you guys are going to get split up. You're going to have a partner, and you're going to go through this structure personality worksheet. Okay, so make sure that you listen in carefully, otherwise you will not know how to do this. Okay, so the first one is just our personality as a core. What are your values? What are your attitudes? What are your interests? What are your motives? What is your beliefs in both God and amongst your peers? Your level of expectations of behavior. Where is your morality in amongst all of this? So what is at your core? So psychology is the study of the mind, right? And the study of the mind also encompasses those characteristics, those traits that you have. Okay? So now we have what's called a typical response. How you respond to different situations. How do you adjust? What kind of environmental or external factors impact your response? So if somebody, if a teammate gets really angry and upset, and their response is anger, and it's displayed through communication of yelling, okay? Or it's displayed with grabbing the ball and just bouncing it hard on the floor, or hitting that volleyball into the net. Whatever those responses are, what is your response to that? Is it to stand back and be quiet? Is it to calmly talk to them? What is your response towards that situation? What about your coach? Your coach is yelling, angry, upset about something you didn't do, or the fact that you were late. What is your response to that? Those things are external factors that happen. Okay, but then we have role-related behavior. And role behavior is kind of at the top. Okay, and I'm gonna draw a diagram for you. For those of you, I'm not a very good drawer. But a role-related behavior is, what type of a role are you in? So you as a person are a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister, a teammate, an athlete, a student. We have all kinds of, an employee. Some of you guys work. All of those are role-related behaviors. So in a role-related behavior, what is your responses to different situations? Does that make sense? So if an employer comes at you and you're working, Lindsay, where do you work at?
Foxwood Springs Senior Living.
Okay, what do you do?
I serve old people.
Food. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if your employer sees that you're late, let's just say you're 5 minutes late. Okay? And she confronts you. Your response could be different than if you were late to a family function and your dad confronted you. Right? You have two different responses to both situations, right? Okay? So there might be a situation where you're at a party, there's nobody you know, so what is your tendency to be? Maybe quiet, a little bit reserved because you don't know anybody. But then you go to a party at Calvary. You all know there's a lot of parties going on at Calvary. Okay? And if you're an extrovert by nature, okay, you're gonna laugh, you're gonna joke, you're gonna talk to everybody, right? But if a person who didn't know you saw you at the first party, they would assume what?
You're an outcast.
You're shy, you're more reserved, right? But that's not who you are typically. You're more of an extrovert. But because you were put in a situation where you didn't know anybody, there wasn't as much talking and communication as if you were in a different place. So there are people who are more shy and reserved in bigger social situations. They get home to their family and they're the loudest person of their family. Right? So we all have different responses depending on our environment. Okay, so kind of put this in a, don't worry, let me see, I'll put it back up. that a great triangle or what? Yeah, thank you. It's not even at all. Alright, so we have this role related behavior. And then we have our typical responses. And then we have our actual psychological core. Remember, our value systems and our beliefs. Okay? We have internal, which is more along the lines of our psychological core, what we internalize. Okay? And that also produces more of a constant personality type that we have. And then with role-related behavior, we have external. And what this does is it encompasses both. Here, the typical response and what our roles are in that behavior. And that has that external factor. Okay, and it's more dynamic in approach. Okay. So we might hold on to our cores and values, and we might possess maybe a different type of traits that we have within our personality, who we are as an individual, who may be somebody who talks nonstop at home, okay, but doesn't necessarily produce that in different external factors out in the world about us. We might even act differently as an athlete on a team than we do maybe in the work environment. We might be more confident as an athlete than we are as an employee. We might talk more as a teammate than we do as an employee or communicate. We might communicate with our coaches, right? Okay, but because of this, people view us differently here in this role-related behavior. Okay, this is kind of like the outside of a cherry. So you have this peel of a cherry, right? You have the stem, and you kind of have a little bit of a peel. Okay, that's your role-related behavior. Your typical response is the meat of the cherry. It's the goodness of it. Okay? And then that psychological core is that seed inside. And what I mean by that is people might observe you with that role-related behavior, that peel on the outside, that typical response. They'll get to know it, but they have to dive in deep to really know where your psychological core is, what it comprises of, what your morals and values are. So, this is what you guys are going to do. You're going to be split up into partners, and you're going to have to move. And what you're going to do is you're going to listen to the person, communicate what their roles are, what kind of roles they have within their life currently. So if you're not employed right now, then you don't put that you're an employee. So you're not answering these as an individual. Your person is actually taking down the answers. Hey, Tobias, I haven't split you up into partners yet. Okay. So Seth, you're gonna be with Shalom.
Good luck to them.
Ari, you're gonna be with Zeb. Tobias, you're gonna be with Taylor. Macy, you're gonna be with Tori, and Lindsay, you're gonna be with Buzz. All right, here we go.
I'm coming to you.
Okay. All right, who needs a pen? or pencil.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go.
Good.
Hey, this also
Yes.
counts as participation points. Okay? So I don't want to see just one sentence or one word. And you better fill up that section.
Okay.
Fill it up.
All right. Anybody else
And
need
I write
pens?
down
Okay, got it.
Pencils?
Is that a pen?
No, it's a pencil. I just have pencils. Sorry. Zeb, do you need a pen?
I'm good.
Okay. All right, here we go.
And
Remember, listen.
We start.
Yep.
Cool.
So I'm writing down what she says.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, you're writing down what your partner says.
On the first one, it's like, it says like he's a son, he's a,
Okay. Cool. I'm a daughter. Here we go.
sure.
I
You're writing down what
the daycare.
So what are your roles?
What are your roles?
my roles.
Like
Is that something?
I'm a son.
How do you act around the babies?
I'm
I'm a basketball player.
He's responsible because I'm talking like a mom. So you act like a mom when you're around babies? Yeah, you
student body president.
Like what type of mom?
I'm a friend.
student body.
Male rep for the sophomore class.
There you go. You're welcome. Shoot, what else?
Like, do you act like you're more like stern but also endearing? Or are you more like
That's a pretty solid
really
list.
sweet to them and
I'm
don't
more
really
nice to
them.
yeah, care
Roles.
about
Roles.
Yeah, I mean, unless they
My
like
wife
run away or
cried.
something.
Yeah.
But
You don't play as heavy discipline.
Yeah,
no.
role. Okay.
Athlete.
Okay, anybody having problems with this?
Not
Not yet.
not too, but I don't really know if I'm doing it right.
Okay, so you're writing down your roles.
Yes.
Okay. And then you're writing your responses within those roles.
Within each role you wrote down?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, for instance,
Okay.
if you're a sibling, right? If you're a brother or a sister, how do you relate to your other siblings? Are you shy, or not really shy, but are you more laid back, or are you more controlling, or strong-willed? How about in relation to your parents?
Yeah, we do
Where
multiple.
are you? What is your strong personality with your parents? As a teammate, are you in a leadership role? Are you not in a leadership role? Are you an underclassman? And if you are you silly, goofy, laid back, or are you shy and more reserved? And then the last one is, what are your most basic values, cores, beliefs that you possess? What are the things that you value the most in life?
Oh, that's deep.
It is! That's why we have it!
Coach.
Right. What is yours?
How many? Do we have to have a certain amount of roles?
I don't think so. I'm also.
Well, you should have about 4 to 5.
How many do I have?
How many do we have to write for our roles? Because we're really going over.
Oh, is it
Like,
babysitting or
4 to
no?
5.
It's
What else?
I'm in retail.
That's
I don't
what
know.
So now I have some. Okay, so
brother.
how many siblings do you have?
4.
Alright. Do you relate the same way to all your siblings, or are they unique for each one?
Unique.
Alright, so now-
what would you say is the most confrontational siblings you have, and how do you act around them?
What? What's some differences that
That's
you
what
guys
we're looking for.
How would you
Sorry.
Friends.
What do you mean, like people had the closest?
Or no, like confrontational.
Okay,
You don't get along.
So for me, son,